This is Africa Live on CCTV News with me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program, mining giant announces the sacking of 1,000 workers across 3 of its chrome mines in South Africa. And a boost for South African football team as they prepare for must-win tie against the Central African Republic. Egypt's Constitutional Court issued a verdict that ruled to dissolve Egypt's upper house of the parliament and the Constituent Assembly. The verdict surprised the country with the possibility of having a legislation vacuum in Egypt. The upper house was promoted to legislate laws after a similar verdict dissolved the lower house. Adel Mahroui tells us more.
A new verdict from Egypt's Constitutional Court shook the country. After near a year of investigations, the court found the former elections law and the Constituent Assembly law non-constitutional. This made it rule to dissolve the upper house of the parliament and the former Constituent Assembly. But to avoid the legislative vacuum, Egypt's Supreme Court advised to keep the upper house operating until the lower house is elected.
يكشف بشكل جلي.
This is an indication that the political Islamic powers did try to monopolize power, but they didn't have the professional caliber to do it properly. And despite that, the verdict will not be applied immediately. It will cause tension in the political street. If the ruling party didn't respect the law, we might see others now who wouldn't.
This week, we have seen verdicts that have been treated differently. The court earlier gave the right for military people to vote, while the same law have been submitted before, but the Constitutional Court never mentioned it. The second is the Parliament verdict, where the court decided to keep the upper house operating while it ruled to dissolve the lower house of the Parliament. Yet both were elected by the same law.
The verdict will now go to the States Cases Association, which will translate the verdict to administrative actions. However, dilemma rose. If the upper house, that is now an illegal body, continues, it would be issuing laws formed by wrongfully elected group.
The situation remains as is. The upper house will keep working and the constitution has gained the public vote. So it will also remain with popular immunity. Part of it because the new constitution gives parliament immunity.
The accurate impact of the verdict remains debatable, but what politicians agreed upon, it will give room for anyone to doubt the legality of any future law. Once again, the Constitutional Court causes disruption in the Egyptian political street. While the verdict did not change anything in reality, both the upper house of the parliament and the constitution remain operating. Yet it only made people confused. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
We move to Niger now, where some 22 prisoners, including Islamist militants, have escaped from a prison in the capital, Niamey, the government said on Sunday. Now, this follows after several gunmen attacked the jail, killing 2 guards. And among the prisoners unaccounted for were some convicted on terrorism charges. The prison break comes a week after Al-Qaeda-linked groups raided a uranium mine and an army barracks in Niger, raising fears that the conflict in neighboring Mali could spread to other West African states. In a separate incident on Sunday, security forces opened fire on a suspicious vehicle which had driven several times around a building housing the country's anti-terror police unit. Niger, which has emerged as a firm ally in the fight against Al-Qaeda-linked groups in the Sahel region, is trying to close its porous desert borders to Islamist groups thought to have shifted their bases to southern Libya. It's time now to take a short break on Africa Live, but when we return, storm over the lake. The border dispute between Tanzania and Malawi rages on. And tales of how motorcycles have become a nightmare in Uganda.
Breaking news. Global trends. CCTV News brings you stories with the different aspects of Africa in the international content. With our reporters across Africa and all over the world, we'll tell you about the real Africa and how it impacts the world. Africa Live, every day, only on CCTV News.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need to trade justice. Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world. Let's now head to South Africa, where investigations by the country's finance ministry are underway over claims that ex-Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and his family stashed $1 billion worth of assets in the country. Gaddafi, who was executed in 2011 after a political uprising in Libya, is thought to have foreign assets totaling as much as $80 billion. Libya has reportedly called for help in repatriating diamonds, gold and cash, believed to be held by 4 banks and 2 security companies, which it says is state property. Meanwhile, South Africa's opposition Democratic Alliance Party has spoken out about the suspected presence of Libya's former Chief of Staff Bashir Saleh in the country. It alleges that Saleh, who is also on Interpol's most wanted list, had been seen several times and said he must be arrested if he is in South Africa. Well, let's get more on that. And we're joined now by CCTV Sumitra Naidu live from Johannesburg. Sumitra, what more do we know about the whereabouts of Gaddafi's assets and the discussions taking place between Libyan and South African officials?
Well, we're not getting too much more information at this stage. And, you know, these allegations have been around for quite some time. The new development in the story is that an official request has come through from the Libyan government to repatriate all of these assets, these so-called assets that seem to be in South Africa. I did have a chat with the South African Finance Ministry this morning, and they say they still need to verify all of this. They need to verify who the group is that is requesting this kind of information and requesting to repatriate these assets in South Africa. And they also need to verify which South African banks, 4 banks apparently are holding some of these assets for the Libyan government. So they need to verify all of this. It's going to take quite a bit of time. They don't have any other details as yet. So there would have to be negotiations in terms of the Finance Ministry having to speak to the South African Reserve Bank, to the various banks in the country to establish where exactly these assets, if there are any assets, in South Africa.
Well, Sumitra, the former Libyan leader did enjoy cordial relations with South Africa. Is it likely that this development may affect relations between the two countries?
Well, I think, largely it will depend on what happens in terms of these assets. But some of the analysts that I spoke to say that it wouldn't really. South Africa had really good relations with Muammar Gaddafi and the Libyan government back in the time of Nelson Mandela. When he was president, he had really good relationships with Gaddafi. That seemed to have tapered off a little bit when President Thabo Mbeki took over. And again, we saw, that kind of relationship filtering through to now the time under President Jacob Zuma. But of course, we do know that the president had stepped in and gave his vote for airstrikes to continue in Libya. So we're not too sure whether this will actually affect. Some analysts seem to think that, relationships will continue. Of course, there's a new dispensation in Libya as well. A lot of that needs to tie into this discussion in terms of whether this relationship will be soured by this by the fact that there could be assets in South Africa.
All right, CCTV Sumitra Naidu joining us there from Johannesburg. Malawi has opposed plans by its neighbor Tanzania to deploy 2 ships on Lake Malawi, which it says threaten mediation efforts to resolve a long-standing border dispute. Malawi's Foreign Affairs Minister Ephraim Chiume said on Saturday that the Tanzanian government had stated publicly that the East African nation was buying 6 new passenger ships, 2 of which were destined for Lake Malawi. Tanzanian officials are yet to comment. Malawi, which sits to the west of Africa's 3rd largest lake, claims the entire northern half of the lake, while Tanzania, to the east, says it owns half of the northern area. The southern half is shared between Malawi and Mozambique. Last month, Malawi returned to talks aimed at resolving a dispute over Lake Malawi that has soured relations between the two countries and delayed exploration for oil and gas. Authorities in Uganda's capital, Kampala, are concerned by the growing number of motorcycles, commonly called bodabodas, which they say are increasingly restricting traffic flow and causing accidents in the city. Planners estimate that more than 200,000 bodabodas operate in the city. The council now wants to clamp down on the number of bicycles on roads. CCTV's Isabel Nakiria has more from Kampala.
It's one of the fastest ways of getting around Kampala and through its heavy traffic, but it's one of the most dangerous. Some bodabodas are even riding in from nearby towns, about 30 kilometers away, to come to Kampala and operate here. City authorities say they are overwhelmed by the growing numbers, and Kampala police say the motorcyclists often don't follow traffic regulations.
They always fault the law with a lot of impunity because they know they can't easily be fooled. They cause many accidents on the roads, and they even participate in the commission of crimes.
Police statistics show bodabodas kill at least 500 and injure another 1,200 people in Uganda every year. A special ward at the main referral hospital in the country has been dedicated to victims of bodaboda accidents. About 20 cases are received daily. Registration of the cyclists will soon begin to ascertain the exact number before authorities decide on how many should be allowed to remain in the city.
And we are saying we are going to streamline, offer jackets on divisional basis, and we hope that that will reduce on the numbers within the city by allowing those that genuinely should be in the city to operate. And then the other divisions, the other districts around Kampala will take their own initiative to improve on their people and on their organization as well, and then be able to control congestion.
New regulations will require each motorcyclist to have 2 helmets, one for the rider and another for the passenger, a rider's license and reflector jackets. Kampala's roads were designed over 50 years ago, and there were no specific lanes designated for cyclists or buses. City planners said this makes it very difficult to control traffic within the city because the roads are narrow.
The planning in the city has been terrible. The roads have not expanded. These were roads that were done in the 1950s and 1960s for only maybe even less than 10,000 cars. Now we have over 400,000 cars, plus another industry going on bodabodas in the city. The city has not been planned properly.
Police have also issued new rules for cyclists who break traffic laws, with penalties of up to 100,000 shillings for offenders.
During rush hours, motorists get hauled up in traffic for even 30 minutes or more. Now that is the time when riders get most busy. But authorities say they have no regard for other road users ending up scratching other people's cars or knocking pedestrians off pavements and only getting off scot-free. Police says this must stop. Isabel Nakiria, CCTV, Kampala.
Well, let's return to Egypt, where the Ministry of Antiquities has dismissed a U.S. embassy message to American citizens in Egypt, urging them to be extra cautious because of recent incidents near the pyramids in Giza due to lack of visible security or police presence there. It noted incidents of angry groups of individuals surrounding and pounding on cars with visitors, sometimes trying to open car doors. Ministry statement on Saturday says the warning is baseless, insisting the pyramids area in Giza, Cairo's twin city, is totally secure and that the overall situation for tourists has improved. Well, let's hear more on this from CCTV's Yasser Hakim, who joins us from the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Yasser, has that warning by the American government affected the flow of tourists to the area?
Well, it's a bit too early to say now because the warning was just yesterday. But just measuring from what happened before and the previous warnings, yes, it will affect the flow in the next few days and weeks. And the problem is not just the American tourists, but other countries, tourists from other countries, when they hear about a warning from the US Embassy, they also decide not to go, fearing that anything could happen. So yes, the effect usually is a bit negative on the tourist flow in the area.
Yes, the unrest though in Egypt has been a source of concern to the tourism industry there. What assurances though is the government giving that tourists will be safe in Giza and in Cairo as well?
Well, the government is trying to increase presence. They said that every group of tourists will be joined by police force to kind of, first of all, help in moving around the very congested part of Cairo and the traffic jam. So they would open the streets and make the trip easier through the roads of Egypt, or Cairo in particular. And also there will be more presence of what is called the tourism police. And this is a department of the police force just for tourists, and there will be more tourist police forces around the touristic areas in Cairo and Giza, and even outside Cairo and Giza in Luxor and Aswan. So there is a plan to enforce more police in these areas in the coming few weeks.
Yes, as you mentioned there earlier, of course, the US government warning there is likely to have an impact not only on the American tourists, but other tourists as well. Are there any other countries which are traditional sources of tourists for Egypt issuing similar warnings, for instance, in the recent past?
Well, not this time, but in the recent past, like you said, the UK, for example, which sends to Egypt around 1 million tourists per year. There was a warning a couple of months ago when a couple from the UK were kidnapped for ransom. They were freed and they were fine, and they said they were very well treated, but still this caused some concern. The warnings there was from the Italians. The Italians used to send 2 million tourists per year in Egypt. They were the first to open the Sharm el-Sheikh area, for example, for tourism, and they had some warnings, a couple of warnings in the last year concerning areas in Luxor and Aswan, people who block the roads, not for tourists. They block the roads because they have demands against the government, but this affects the tourists' trip to Luxor and Aswan. And they also had some warnings there. It had some effects, especially on Luxor, affected very much by the roadblocks and everything. But there always the warnings are concerned with certain area. It's not a warning saying don't go to Egypt, but don't go to this area because of some security concerns in this area at this time. And after a week or so, it is lifted. The warning is lifted. So we hope that the US warning is lifted very soon to help the flow of tourists to the area.